Welcome to the 2020 Global Peace Film Festival Costa Rica Films panel. My name is Kelly Devine, the Artistic Director. Please join me and Nina Strike, the Executive Director, welcoming the filmmaking teams behind the films, Lifting the Green Screen, Sweet Home Monteverde, and Peace with Nature in Costa Rica, who will be joined in this conversation with two distinguished professors from Rollins College. So thank you. I'm going to name everyone on the teams that you're about to see: Clay Corsant, Claudia Gianetto, Matteo Saltalippe from Lifting the Green Screen, Bill Adler from Sweet Home Monteverde. He'll be joined by Deborah Hamilton, the Executive Director of the Monteverde Institute, and Stuart Tanner from Peace with Nature in Costa Rica. He'll be joined by Robin Tulpenrud. And thank you so much to all of you for sharing your films with our audiences. And thank you to Barry Allen, Associate Professor of Environmental Studies, and Sharon Carnahan, Professor of Psychology and Executive Director of the Hume House Child Development and Student Research Center, who will join us in conversation about the issues and ideas touched upon by these three films. Please be sure to check out the Global Peace Film Festival website, peacefilmfest.org. The festival starts September 21st and runs through October the 4th. Tickets are on sale now. Please check out all of the events on our Watch and Events tabs. And now, let's start the conversation. So thank you, everyone. I'd like to start, if we could, by just introducing ourselves and start with the filmmakers so that you could tell everyone a little bit about your films. So Bill, can we start with you in Sweet Home Monteverde?
Well, sure, Kelly. Thank you very much for having all of us. This is great fun, and it's great to have these other filmmakers discussing Costa Rica. So our film Sweet Home Monteverde was initially intended to profile the 9 Quaker families who emigrated from the United States to Costa Rica during the Korean War. They left their homes in Iowa and Alabama in 1950 and ended up in Costa Rica, mostly overland, and they ended up in Costa Rica in 1951. And they went basically to affect religious freedom. They were Quakers, they are Quakers, and they, rather than wanting to pay their taxes toward the military during the Korean War, they decided to go to federal prison as draft resistors. And when they got out of prison, they said, you know, we just don't want to raise our children here. And they were very young at the time. They ranged in age from 18 years old to 26 years old. And they and their families, there were about 40 altogether, decided they were going to leave the US. And so they did kind of a fact-finding mission in Central America, decided to go to Costa Rica after evaluating the other countries, primarily because Costa Rica had just abolished its army. They had a brief but bloody civil war in 1948, and in 1949 they abolished the army. And as I said, these Americans left in 1950 for Costa Rica. So they ended up settling, looking around for 6 months, and finally settled on this mountaintop, this remote and isolated mountaintop that they named Monteverde. So I'll leave it there. We'll hear from some of the other folks.
And could you first introduce Robin and tell us how he's associated with the film?
So the director of the film is Robin Truesdale. She's not on this call today, but with me is Deborah Hamilton.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And Deb is the executive director of the Monteverde Institute, which was, well, she can tell you, but it was founded in the early 80s as a way to protect the environment, protect biodiversity, and as a response to what was then a very burgeoning tourism scene in Monteverde. And Deb is a biologist. I'll actually let her introduce herself. I don't need to do that for her. So Hi, Deb.
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to meet everyone. I look forward to looking to the other films and the website. My name is Deborah Hamilton. I arrived in Monteverde in 1993. I'm a conservation biologist, and it was to look at different aspects of this farming community and conservation topics. I am now the executive director of the Monteverde Institute, so I pick up kind of a second chapter of what Bill has presented in the film. And the Institute was created as the community was changing from an agricultural community into an ecotourism destination. And in true Quaker fashion, as well as Costa Rican fashion, because the two cultures match in their values quite closely, it was to guide the change in the community, not direct it, but to guide it into a way that a visitor and a local would be mutually benefited by the interaction. And so it looks to advance sustainability on both a local and global level in all aspects. So it's a huge task, but that is the mission of the Institute.
Well, and that ecotourism is a big theme that runs through all three of the films. And Stuart, your film looks at the reforestation success in Costa Rica. Could you speak to, tell us a little bit about the film and tell us a little bit about the guest that you've brought?
Yeah, sure. Be delighted to do so. Yes, Peace with Nature in Costa Rica looks at fundamentally the success story of Costa Rica in terms of restoring its forests, increasing its forest cover, protecting its biodiversity, whilst at the same time growing economically, which is, in contrast to a lot of the other tropical countries. So the question arises, how were they able to do that? What are the mechanisms? What has worked? What are the issues that there still is to do with that? So the film really both recognizes the achievement, gives a vision and an understanding of what mechanisms, how that was brought about, the protection of the natural wealth, and how this was done at the same time as there was economic development, plus what are the ongoing aspirations for Costa Rica in terms of its environment and natural wealth. So Randall Toppenroot is one of the founders of Pax Natura, who work on conservation in various countries, and particularly interested in Costa Rica. But I'll let him introduce himself and talk for himself.
Well, thank you, Stuart, and thank you also to everyone for this. We're very thrilled to be in your festival. So I've been working. We have been working in Costa Rica for about 20 years. And Barry, it looks to me like you might be at Salvatura in Monteverde. Are you up on one of the platforms there?
I wish. I'm in Winter Park, Florida, but.
Oh, okay. Well, it looks like it's Monteverde there in the background. So we actually been involved in, not in forest restoration, but in avoided deforestation program. The Kyoto Protocol created a perverse incentive for tropical forest countries to cut their rainforests and destroy them. And then they would be paid to replant them. And the Costa Rican delegation at Kyoto, led by Franz Tottenbach, an extraordinary forester, basically said that didn't make any sense to them and to the Costa Ricans. And so they started one of the world's first avoided deforestation programs. It's called the Payment for Environmental Services Program. And it's administered by the Fondo Nacional de Financiamiento Forestal, FONAFIFO. And we worked with Franz and Herman Obando Vargas. And we obtained the first internationally recognized or validations under Carbon Community Biodiversity Alliance for the country. And then we've been representing them at the carbon markets worldwide for quite a number of years. And then Stuart and his marvelous crew. We asked them to come down a year and a half ago, and we spent a month with them, a delightful month with them, and we basically went through the programs of FONAFIFO and also the marine conservation and biodiversity conservation program that they have, and documented their success story. And then we honored Christiana Figueres, who's the daughter of Jose Pepe Figueres, who's the founder of Modern Costa Rica. We honored her just before we started that program in San Jose for her work on climate change and the Paris Agreement. So at any rate, wonderful country, and Stuart and his crew did a marvelous job in documenting a wide range of issues in the country. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Randall. And Claudia, Clate, Mateo, please discuss, the approach that you had taken. Tell everybody a bit about lifting the green screen.
Yes, I can go. Thank you very much, Kelly, first of all, for having us. So I'm the director of Lifting the Green Screen. Clate and Matteo are the producers of the film. We are all anthropologists, so we come from academia in this sense, but we made the film to transcend academia and reach a wider audience in this sense. The film Lifting the Green Screen is based on Clate's doctoral thesis. Clate conducted 14 months of fieldwork in the Osa Peninsula, and Lifting the Green Screen is an ethnographic documentary that surveys environmental practice in this particular spot of Costa Rica. As you may know, the Osa Peninsula is famously one of the most biodiverse areas in the world, with 2.5% of global biodiversity, half of the initial species diversity, and containing the largest lowland rainforest on Central America Pacific coast. Lifting the Green Screen, our film focuses on the social political implications for biodiversity conservation in rural Costa Rica. Let's say scoping the complexities of environmentalism as practiced on the ground. We use Clate thesis as a departure point in order to interrogate the nexus and the overlap between capitalism, nationalism, and conservation within a post-colonial and globalizing setting like Costa Rica's Osa Peninsula. Central to our film are indeed debates over the proper methods of conservation, especially regarding land controls. That is how to carry out best practice and negotiate community involvement. The film follows NGOs initiatives, environmentalists, ecotourism entrepreneurs, grassroots activists, but also environmental educators and farmers, including voices of dissent and critique regarding sustainable development, as well as alternative expressions of everyday interaction with surroundings that contrast in a way with mainstream notions of environmental ethics. In a way, this disturbs the idea that there might be a pure practice or a categorical definition for environmentalism, substantiating the argument that environmentalism is fluid, is hybrid, is ambiguous, and performative to the extent to which it's enacted through practice. Because Lifting the Green Screen is an ethnographic documentary informed by anthropological ethics, we made this film because we do believe that anthropological methods illuminate appropriately these tensions that we hope to let emerge through Lifting the Green Screen, these power dynamics and political hierarchies that are present throughout these particular interrelations between communities, NGOs, globalization, and governments. I don't know, Clate, if you want to add something, or Matteo.
No, that was great. Thanks, Claudia. Go see the film.
I try not to spoil anything.
No, I think people will be richly rewarded if they see all three of the films together, because they do provide quite an interesting trio of ways into Costa Rica. And speaking of ways into Costa Rica, we're so happy to have Professor Barry Allen and Professor Sharon Carnahan from Rollins College. And Barry, we'll start with you. What is in introducing yourself, please tell people about the connection that Rollins College has with Costa Rica, in particular with these films.
Okay. Yes, my academic interest is in the role of national parks and protected areas in supporting sustainable development. And I've been going to Costa Rica now for about 25 years, I think like 1995 or so. And we've had a number of different programs down there, some of which we ran with the Associated Colleges of the South. We had a semester program down there for a while. Then we had a several-week program during the summers. And now we're concentrating more on short courses down there of 10 days to 2 weeks. And I remember when we first started doing this, people thought that we were going down there to show the Costa Ricans how to do sustainable development, when actually it was just the reverse, that we were going down there to learn how they are doing sustainable development. It is a very sticky subject, and not without its own controversies, which the films show very well. But I think it is a success story, and we continue to go down there in the midst of all the doom and gloom and on the environmental front to see a country that is really making some progress.
Oh, thank you, Barry. Sharon, could you tell us a little bit about your connection through Rollins College to Costa Rica and why we were so honored to have you on this panel? Sharon, unfortunately, Sharon, we can't hear you. So sorry. While we let Sharon fix her mic, Barry, perhaps we'll start with you. If there's a question, as you heard the introduction from all of the filmmakers, if there's a question that you'd like to ask of our teams, I throw the floor over to you.
Sure, I think I got some good ones here. Let me start with this one. I think that community-based ecotourism is seen by many, myself included, as one of the cornerstones for a sustainable development program in Costa Rica, but it is not without its own set of problems, as the films highlight. I'm wondering if the filmmakers see support for this development strategy maintaining itself, despite the issues that are raised in the films.
Who would like to take the first bite of that question?
I wouldn't mind.
Stuart.
Well, I think in respect of the fact of the protection of the standing forest and the restoration of forest, in regard to the amount of cover that there is in Costa Rica now, and in terms of the protection of the biodiversity in the country, then yes, I'd say the protection for environmental services has been effective. And I think that's the analysis of most organizations and environmental groups and so on. Having said that, of course, there are always issues that arise as regards to protected areas, land use, land entitlement, and so on. And we see those arising in South America and so on, and maybe getting a little bit more fraught than before, in fact. So it's always something that needs to be, and that word community-based, work from the ground up, where policy from the top. And one of the things that we're really impressed with Costa Rica is the way that the different departments of government and the people in government had very clear objectives and aspirations as regards to the ongoing protection of the natural wealth of Costa Rica. Obviously needs to be connected to the ground, to the community level, to all the issues that arise, which can be complex and challenging. And that, in a sense, is a work in progress. But I would like to say that in a very fundamental way, though, from everyone that we met and that we talked to, And in the government, obviously, we were meeting a lot of people in the government, particularly. The aspiration up there is to continue with that and to improve, came across very loud and clear. And even after leaving Costa Rica, I mean, we made the film over a year ago, those aspirations have continued, and there's been further announcements of, policies to protect marine environment, to get rid of plastics in national parks and things like that.
I might add a footnote to that, if I could, just a historical footnote. It turns out that in 1980, Costa Rica had been deforested. They only had about 20% landmass left of forest cover, primarily as a result of an unsustainable agricultural model. So as a result of that, they were beginning to lose their utility grid, which was heavily dependent on hydro, because forests, of course, are crucial for hydroelectric power generation. So they actually started a series of forestry reforms that culminated in the PSA program, basically designed to protect their electricity system. A side effect of that entire process, a series of forestry reforms culminating in the PSA program. The side effect was the creation of ecotourism, because once the forests started to come back, and it turned out that their soils in Costa Rica are very conducive to forest regeneration, they started to link up biological corridors, and these forests began to interconnect and intertwine. And that led to a sort of a whole new industry that was really sort of unanticipated. And it has been subsequently developed to a very high degree in the country. There are some really good, bad examples of ecotourism in Costa Rica, but overall, the idea is small scale eco-lodges with small areas of property that have a wide variety of wildlife for people to come, rather than the big massive developments that have plagued so many other nations. So they've done it, I think, in a very interesting way, in a very good way.
Great.
To add on to that, the question on community-based natural resource management, we found at least 2 examples that are covered in the film. And so one is environmental education, especially the educator we met in La Palma, which is a rural community in the middle of the Osa Peninsula. His name's Mauricio. And if you talk about grassroots and also recognizing what children are often symbolic of, they're often symbolic of the future as future adults, right? So this is where the growth of community ethics is really, you can really see it represented or at least symbolized in practice. And what Mauricio was doing with the songs and the dance and the animal costumes, the headdresses, and also the lyrics of the songs, which always incorporate some aspect of the natural environment and learning about places like Corcovado National Park, for example, but also being attentive to the history of gold mining in the area. In fact, one of the costumes is a so-called reformed gold miner or hunter who is now a tour guide. So this is part of the song and dance ritual that in every environmental education event, Mauricio likes to perform, along with all these screaming, singing students who are dancing and so excited when the costumes come out, right? And the people performing in the costumes are always the older students, so they're kind of involved in this kind of mentorship role for these younger students. So that scene is very much in our minds and in our experience when we were making the film. I think that stands out as community-based natural resource management through education. And perhaps another one is a young activist who spent a lot of time in these very, very early initiatives on people's farms or fincas where they are trying to grow some kind of butterfly project with the idea that they might be able to sell these pupas. This is a very kind of early industry, but it is burgeoning. It is starting to kind of grow up. The idea that there might even be a global market for butterfly pupas. And this could revolutionize some of these small ecotourism outfits and initiatives, because anyone with a little bit of land and access to the forest can find, if they know what they're looking for, caterpillars and kind of grow pupas, and then once there's a market for that, this could be a source of income, and also a source for education and understanding what's available in the immediate environment. So those were two examples that we found that are covered in the film that I think, or hope you'll notice, kind of exemplify a bit of this grassroots community-based natural resource management. And also they're attentive to the fact that socio-environmental justice exists, and issues of inequality and justice shouldn't go ignored within any institution, including environmentalism.
And Bill and Deb, yes.
And,
Oh,
sorry, Bill.
No, please.
I would just add that it's life with nature. It's not life against nature. And so going with this whole theme of, when the government is decentralized, the caring for nature is also decentralized. And in my experience has been working with farmers is that there is an intrinsic value to forests and the environment. And climate change, there is no question, it's accepted. So I think that's a very strong base that this country has. And therefore, going back to Barry's question with ecotourism, it's small family-owned businesses, and there are exceptions. So it's all kind of a countrywide effort, and so I think that's part of the success.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Sharon, and we'll get to you. We'll get to you once we just tie up with Bill. Bill, did you have one last comment to make on this? Or?
Well, I had more of a question comment, and it has to do with the pandemic and this question of ecotourism, because it seems to me, at least in the case of Monteverde, which is a remote, isolated town, as I said, that is wholly dependent on tourism for its economy. I really wanted to get a comment from Deb about the way the community has come together. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that everybody basically is in this, same hole as far as economic deprivation goes. And I know, Deb, you've been doing some work at the Institute regarding that. And I would love to hear about that a little bit.
Classic problem that Monteverde has is everybody comes together. So we have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. But basically, it's absolutely the truth. It's a mountaintop, it's an isolated community, so that creates a whole set of dynamics. It's not isolated, but it's pretty self-contained up there. And I think you find that in all sorts of communities throughout the whole country. And it's community-based. Costa Rican values value community, value family. So our issues, we have too many people trying to figure out what's the best for everybody. And with the Institute, we diverted all of our program students this year, so we diverted everything into community programs. And a third of our work is in the community as well. And we're fortunate. I think the country has handled the pandemic with incredible coordination. I know it's suffering, it is suffering right now, but it is how the communities operate. They tend to all come together and try to solve it and make it better. We have small jobs programs. There's a whole food delivery service. Everybody jumped right on it right off the bat.
Oh, great. So Sharon, welcome.
Thank you.
We're so glad we can hear you. So
Good.
please, we'd love to hear your question for the group.
Sure. I'd just like to tell you a sentence or two in that I come from this from a very different angle. I'm a developmental psychologist. I on the advice of Barry and others, I first lived in Monteverde and Santa Elena in 1997, and then led about a dozen month-long January or May student trips. We also lived there as a family a couple more times over the years. So I studied the impact of the Quaker community and the Santa Elena community on and their interactions on the lives of children and families and how they've influenced each other. I also study how tourism has changed the role of women through women-owned businesses and co-ops like CASEM in making a living alongside their husbands, which was completely unheard of before. So I'm really interested in the social dynamics. So one of the questions that I have was, how do you think that ecotourism has affected the role of women in remote areas like Monteverde, where so many have turned to tourism-based businesses that wouldn't have been accessible to them before?
Who would like to?
Who would like to jump in on that one?
Hi.
Probably Deb.
I think so.
Oh, Deb, you're muted.
I can, but
Here, thank you, Deb.
okay. In the time that I've been there in 27 years, it's changed drastically. And Sharon, I think you're alluding to that. And ecotourism has grown. Bilingualism is huge. And now you see real equality in the number of women working. When you look at the national figures, they do range from, I think, about 33% to 50% of saying the percentage of women in the workforce. But between learning English and having the opportunity to go to work, definitely family sizes are definitely smaller. And that's a normal demographic change that happens. They're much more empowered. When I first got there, I went to dinner, at lunch, I visit a lot of houses, and women wouldn't sit at the table to eat. They would serve. In other cases, I laughed with a woman friend and I said, we could be here all day. In my culture, I don't start until the woman starts, and she doesn't start until the other people start in Costa Rica. And those things have changed. So I think on the empowerment and equality, it's been huge. The amount of education has also increased. I'm not a social scientist, so I'm talking through observances.
Well, one of the things we really noticed was the influence of English language infusion in the community through the Quaker community, and then through the bringing in of so many students and volunteers and helpers who spoke English. And there was a time when knowing English meant you would double your income in Costa Rica almost instantly. I've had the opportunity to watch a lot of children grow up since 1997 from extremely tough circumstances and see them, college graduates now. Well, a lot of that was because of either the Friends School or Escuela Creativa providing them with the opportunity to learn English. I actually only have one other big question, so I'll ask it. I've got a whole list of little ones. I noticed that the Monteverde movie accessed a fairly small number of Quaker senior citizens for interviews, mostly the Gwindens. And I wonder how that came about. Did you actually try to reach more people, or decide to focus on a couple of known leaders, or how was the film decision making made there?
Well, we reached everybody who's still alive who was a founder of the community, with the exception of one gentleman who was camera shy and who spoke to us off camera. But the other ones...
was that the Newswangers?
No,
Oh, there was
it's
somebody else. Okay.
somebody else.
Okay.
And he's shy, so I won't even mention his name now. I'll grant him his privacy.
Yes, absolutely.
But Marvin Rockwell, Mary Rockwell, and the Gwindens, as you mentioned, were on there, and Mildred Mendenhall, who now lives in British Columbia, but who just died this past year, this past May, in her late 90s. But, you know, you got to remember that these folks, as I said, were you know, they came 65, almost 70 years ago now, and some of them were already in their 20s. So, you know, most of them have lived good, long lives. And we got to all the ones we can, but we didn't start. I started filming in 2013. And, you know, I wish I'd gotten there earlier. I could have gotten some more of the elders, but that's who we could get. So I'm glad we got them.
Wonderful.
Well, that's wonderful. I'd now like to turn so that the filmmakers who have also had a chance to see one another's films, is there any questions that you have about one another, especially considering the very different, understandably different approaches and different subjects that you have made out of this shared country of Costa Rica? Who would like to?
I had a question, I think for both of the other films, if I could, and I think it was the green screen, lifting the green screen made a point that really stuck with me when I watched your film, and it was that the richest biodiversity and the poorest population is basically a recipe for a big sustainability challenge. And I see that, you know, to some degree in Monteverde, but I didn't have a really good view of that nationwide in Costa Rica. And I wanted to ask you both to just explore that a little bit, and your findings down in the OSA and elsewhere regarding that equation, because I found it fascinating.
Clay, do you want to take this, and then I will ask my question?
Sure. So it's challenging because people face their own structures of injustice or socioeconomic realities, various types of systemic inequality or systemic violence. And then the challenge is, okay, that in a rural area and in an area with that is, when we're talking about the physical Osa Peninsula, it's 80% controlled, right? There's the national park, Corcovado, and then there's the Golfo Dulce Forest Reserve on top of that. So that means that the actual geographic region has 80% land controls, which includes villages that have been there for decades. And with the forest reserve, those villages, most of the people there don't have titles to their land. They don't have land titles. So this is a challenge, which means that anything you do, any wood you gather, any deadfall you use, all of that is essentially done illegally because you don't have title, so you can't get a permit. So that's a specific example of the challenge. But I guess more generally, and maybe to answer your question more clearly, it means that there has to be stronger channels of trust and communication between the incoming initiatives that mostly start in the Central Valley, San Jose, or elsewhere in the world. So rather than just come in with a top-down model, there has to be trust and communication established between the stakeholders on the ground and the incoming NGOs or governmental officials. And only then do you really begin to address, rather than speaking down to people or telling them what their issues are, you're actually asking questions, and you're asking them what are the main issues. And then through their understanding of what the problems are, you kind of cooperate and build a more democratic model, if that makes sense, that includes the needs as we understand it locally, in addition to what the experts say who drop in from San Jose or elsewhere.
Thank you.
Stuart Randall, did you have?
Yeah, I'd like to say something on that. Well, firstly on the macro level, then one thing to note perhaps is that Costa Rica has one of the lowest rates of poverty in Latin America, and clearly part of the reason for that is that through the protection of the natural wealth and the various programs that have been created, that has drawn in ecotourism, that has provided a lot of employment and brings in billions of dollars every year. Obviously, presently with the pandemic, like with other countries, particularly those who depend on tourism, there's going to be a shortfall of income, and that will and is expected to increase poverty rates. Now, the other side of that is that the indigenous community are amongst the poorest in the nation, and also are engaged in various land issues. They were granted those, recognition of indigenous territories in the laws that were brought in the 1970s. But in the sense, the implementation of those is still ongoing and complex in terms of access to lands that have been declared national parks, or indigenous communities who have been removed and want to go back, or farmers who've been on indigenous communities and actually haven't been compensated if they need to move. These things are, as we all know, pretty complex and challenging in the matrix of both protecting environments, which means to a large extent can involve the denial of access for hunting, for various activities, or for farming, and also historic indigenous rights recognition, or compensating people who maybe have lived on land for 40 years as farmers, but now they need to move. So, it is a complex matrix, and obviously it needs ongoing attention and sorting out. But it's certainly a question that intrigued me, because in some broad sense, you can see that Costa Rica is a pretty liberal economy. Therefore, it has allowed quite a big inflow of capital from outside to acquire land, to set up ecotourism and so on. And that obviously can trigger issues of one kind or another in terms of that capital coming in from the inside and buying up fantastic pieces of land or so on. Nonetheless, as we see, many of those people have protected standing forests or allowed areas to grow back to become forest, and there's a great deal of income that comes through. So it's hard to say, here's the line, here's the balance, there's the resolution, except to say that on the broader picture, obviously, both the natural wealth and in general, the country and its people have benefited. But of course, you need to look down through the layers and see what's happening at each of those layers, and make sure that, as was expressed as an aspiration, that there is equitable sort of benefits for people in different areas and different communities, and that there isn't a leaving behind. Having said that, look at the scale of the leaving behind in America or other countries, as well. So
Costa Rica has its own legacy of racism against Afro Costa Ricans as well as indigenous people. But, as North Americans, we haven't got a leg to stand on that one.
Well, to synthesize a bit, it seems as though, Stuart, you're describing that policy is in itself almost like a living organism. It has to have the right inputs and outputs, and has to be flexible in order to.
Just a quick comment on that very point. I think that, one really important defining characteristic of what makes something workable and progressive and in general moving in the right direction, even with all the issues, is good governance. And I have to say that, you know, having been to many, many countries and interviewing many governments, many ministers, and many situations, I have to say that I found that the people in government that I encountered, or we encountered and interviewed and so on, were impressive in that way. Obviously, there's no zero corruption, but in terms of good governance and development of policy and a willingness to sort of go into issues and tackle them, I personally would say I felt that that was stronger, much stronger in Costa Rica than in a lot of other places that I've been to. And obviously with recognition of the ongoing challenges. And I think that's crucial.
Thank you, Stuart. And Matteo, you said you had a question for.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions more about the films than the context. And obviously for us, we worked with Late. We all attended the same PhD course, and then we worked with them. We are all anthropologists. We know how to deal with people in the field work, and it was easy for us because Clayton knew all the participants, all the people that have been interviewed in the film. And it would be interesting for me, for us to understand how the other filmmakers gained access to the communities. And also, I mean, for anthropology, there is the big thing is like giving back, making a film that gives something back to the community. And I wanted to understand from the other filmmakers whether this is a thing they thought about, like, rather than just the pedagogical impact that the film has on a wider audience, what can it make film for the community you filmed?
That's great. Stuart, Bill, who would like to go first in terms of how you got your access and what you gave back in the process?
Well, I will say that, you know, I was making a film about a very small community, and my family and I moved into that community in 2012, and we were there for 3 years. And when you're among, you know, a small group, access was not that difficult to achieve. And it was, I don't know, I think because I've been a reporter my entire professional life, I'm sort of used to asking questions, and I was so curious about this community in Monteverde that it sort of came natural to invite myself over to people's houses and eventually show up with a camera. But, you know, that said, you do want to make people comfortable first before you invade with, you know, a tape recorder or a camera. And also in this case, I was asking questions about their own lives, some of which they had answered many times before, because there have been, you know, quite a few journalists and I guess some filmmakers who have come to town and asked those questions. But I guess the advantage I had was that I was sticking around. I wasn't parachuting in for a week.
That is the Monteverde advantage.
Yeah, right, right. As far as giving back, to me, and this is just a modest thing, but I really felt like if somebody was going to make a feature-length documentary about the Quakers in Costa Rica, it had to be done soon, because as Sharon already brought up, there weren't that many subjects in the film. And so I just wanted to be able to give them a film that got it as right as possible, or as right that I could get it. And I'm still an outsider. I was an outsider. I was only there for a few years. You know, Deb's been there 27 years, and to some degree, you know, she's not, you know, still accepted. But nevertheless, I just wanted to do it as best I could, so that they would have a document of their time, and also kind of a legacy. to show to folks. And so that's really what I was hoping to give back to this in terms of the film.
Oh, that's great, Bill. Stuart, your access and how you see the film giving back.
I might add a comment here, a footnote to what Stuart said earlier, and then also a comment that Bill was just talking about. First of all, the Costa Rican genius is what we're trying to showcase in this film. We gave them very little. We gave them very little. What we were taking from them as a model for other countries, especially in the region, and showcase how it's done. Their educational program to focus on environmental education for the youth of the nation has been crucial for their ability to protect their natural environment. And so if you look at the carbon markets, and there's a lot of criticism about carbon offset credits for forestry projects worldwide, but we always emphasize you cannot compare them because Costa Rica operates on a completely different scale, on a completely different level. So the average size project is about 27 hectares, and there are 7,000 landowners currently enrolled in the program, and there's more demand for the program than there are funds to accommodate it. And so everyone that we interviewed, and they're small scale landowners, who this program provides not a lot of funding, but it provides a little funding. It pays for their supplies, their food, and a few things like that, so that they can focus on protecting their forest, protecting their little plot of land, as opposed to these massive developments and massive carbon market in Asia, other parts of sub-Saharan Africa that are disastrous for these countries. So the Costa Ricans have kept it small scale, and I think that the people that we interviewed very much have appreciated what little help they're getting from the program, but it's very significant. And also with regard to the pandemic, another thing about Costa Rica that is so remarkable is that they locked down immediately. They shut the country down, nobody coming into the country. And they pretty much had a very good handle on the pandemic. They had stopped the spread of it. But the challenge is they've got such a very excellent healthcare system for the entire population of the country that they're getting a lot of influx from Nicaragua, who has no whatsoever protection for these people in that country. And so they're coming to Costa Rica for treatment. And the Costa Rican medical care system is treating them. So you don't have to really go too far in the country to showcase the example that they're holding up to the world, that if you cut your military, you stop spending money on things that destroy people and put it into life-supporting things like environmental conservation, environmental education, and healthcare. That is by far the greatest economic and national defense expenditures imaginable, because it keeps the country strong and healthy, and the children committed to protecting their natural environment. So it's really showcasing the Costa Rican genius. We got a lot more from them than they ever got from us.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's absolutely the essence of it. And I think in general also, it's a story that, is very important to get out there, because, I'm also teaching in an academic environment, obviously, about a number of different issues. And it is possible for people to be overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges that are currently facing us. You only need to read the most recent report on the decline of biodiversity and natural ecosystems and so on. So the models that have been created in Costa Rica, the general success story, even with any caveats, is very important to get out there. And it's a giving, in a sense, from Costa Rica to the wider community, the genius that Randall mentions, that can be an inspiration and reach other people and be an example. And that's something they're also very much aware of. And you know, are keen to help other countries and have done so and engage with other countries in terms of passing on their experience and their wisdom and so on. So it's interesting in a way. The answer to the question is the gift that Costa Rica is giving out, which hopefully we're enhancing in our own way, in terms of sharing the genius and sharing what they've achieved and recognizing it, and you know, showing how that was brought about.
Well, Stuart and Randall, thank you very much for taking the discussion in that direction, because that is the last question I'd like to ask of everyone else. If you could answer quickly. I apologize. This was in such an interesting discussion. We've run a bit long, but what Randall and Stuart really touched on, the idea of a model and what people can do. And that's at the heart of what Global Peace Film Festival does as an organization, tries to inspire people to take action. So if first the other two filmmaking teams can talk about what you hope viewers will take away, and then Barry and Sharon, I'll go to you in terms of what you hope your students and other people will take away from this wider discussion. So Phil, could we start with you, what you hope people would take away from watching Sweet Home Monteverde?
Sure, thanks. To me, this film was really about courageous people, but everyday people, ordinary people who took a stand and did something so inspiring to me anyway, just leaving everything they knew and moving to a new country where they didn't speak the language, they didn't know a soul, and they took some action. And I think, that's one of the lessons to impart from this film, is that do something. It can just take a small group. I mean, this was 9 families that started, and they've, created in many ways this sustainable community, and they've made a big difference. They created a friends school, and future generations of activists and people who understand and put into action Quaker values and beliefs, and who are now working against climate change in that community, and really have come together. And so I think, to me, that's one of the really great things about documenting this, is just having people have a sense that they can do something. And I'd like to also ask Deb to comment on that, if I could.
I think in part of the film, it's mentioned that Monteverde there's these Quaker values, but I feel very strongly that they match Costa Rican values about humility, about simplicity, about equality, about family and community. What I took away after seeing the film, once it was put together, it was a story of kind of this quiet, persistent rebellion. And I would say that's Costa Rica. It's done very humbly and very, and Stuart and Randall and Claudia and Mateo and Clay, everything it seems to be shown is it is this quiet rebellion against how a lot of the rest of the world is working. I'm also impressed by a Quaker saying of there's wisdom in the collective, and it's about guiding rather than directing. And there's many different things that you get a lot more done working together as long as you're pulling in the same direction and pretty much at the same speed, which doesn't always happen when you work with consensus. But it's a remarkable, remarkable country. And I think every filmmaker here deserves a lot of credit for showing those stories.
Claudia?
Yeah, I would like the audience to walk away from these films that we are discussing now with questions. Because change is not about certainty, but about doubt. Doubt understood in a Cartesian way, as this attitude to question easy assumptions and to interrogate reality, taking into consideration different points of views, which entails also understanding complexity. Complexity is not a bad word. The reality we live in is complex, and complex doesn't necessarily mean difficult. It means that reality have layers, and I just feel that in these times of various threats and uncertainties, we tend to oversimplify things. And I believe, and this is what we wanted to express with Lifting the Green Screen, is that we must preserve and embrace this complexity. And we need to find a way to read it through. This is key to building a more sustainable world. We need to understand what sustainability and development means for other people. And this is where we need to make a cognitive effort, and where it's not enough to get closer to the other, we need empathy. So change needs cooperation and the ability to empathize with human or non-human forms of life. And our knowledge is always situated. So to change, we really need to understand where we are situated, the place we speak from, that always influences our arguments and how we speak. And it's about understanding our privilege, whatever this might be, and question our perspective. So we hope, as Lifting the Green Screen team, to inspire people to construct this world, as the Zapatistas say, where many words fit. I really like this idea. By emphasizing the dignity of others and the common struggle.
Thank you very much. And Barry and Sharon, we were so honored to have you because of your work with Rollins College. Could you speak to what you hope maybe some of your students who may be watching this interview, who may be watching these 3 films, what you would hope they would take away from this discussion? Barry? Oh, Barry, or
Barry.
Sharon? Yeah, Sharon, let's go. Let's go to you.
You have to unmute.
Got it. I didn't know I could do it from my end. I was saying that it's hard for me to beat a quote from the Zapatistas, but I'd like people to realize that every few months or so, the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times will run a feature story, something like Nicaragua, the next Costa Rica, or Honduras, the next Costa Rica, or Ecuador, the next Costa Rica, Belize, the next Costa Rica. And what I think the film brings, all the films brought out, is that those sustainability successes are decades in the making. And they too are built on a foundation of a much greater political democracy than we find in a lot of other places that are trying to find stumbling towards sustainability. And that some of those political and economic realities and some of those shortcomings of the political and economic systems really need to be dealt with at the same time that we're dealing with conservation activities, or the conservation activities will ultimately fail. If we don't have the support of the broad-based community, no protected area will be safe indefinitely.
Thank you, Barry. Sharon.
I'd like my students to take away a sense that a positive decision carried out over time can have a really strong positive result. That the choices we make, the decisions we make, have far-reaching implications, but that things take time to develop. My students who will be watching this film are taking a course called Children Around the World. And I want them to think about how the original Quaker settlers' choices, made according to their moral values and their culture, affected the generations after them as well, the children who are coming up now. But most importantly, it wasn't just the Quakers, it was the Costa Ricans who decided to come alongside and accept and embrace and work with their new neighbors. we could have had, right, some highfalutin bunch of Texas pacifists, right, who stayed isolated and never blended, never connected with the surrounding community. Instead, the Quakers have benefited from their immersion in Costa Rica. All the kids are bilingual. All the kids understand the ecology, right? Most of them are kind and embrace social justice. And the Costa Rican children have benefited from connection and outreach from the Quaker community. It's not always smooth and easy, right? There sometimes big conflicts. Just try to build a road in Costa Rica and see what happens. But I want my students to see that choice making can have long-term positive repercussions, and that cultures can work together for the common good.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been, oh, Randall, you had the, yes.
Bye, Bill.
Randall, Randall, you're muted.
Got it, sorry. I'm gonna kick myself if I don't mention these names. We were talking about women earlier, and the Costa Rican women who are extraordinary include, of course, Cristiana Figueres, the Secretary General, UNFCCC, Ana Baez, who's head of Conservation Consultor, one of the world's foremost authorities on ecotourism, and she sets up ecotourism programs based on the Costa Rican model in countries all over the world, including Cuba. She's very much involved there. Laura Chinchilla is a big, huge supporter of the work in biodiversity conservation and forestry, president of the country. The current Ministry of Tourism is a woman, and the current wife of the current president of Costa Rica is the one who has pushed the decarbonization plan, the decarbonization of the entire economy to phase out the internal combustion engine by either 2030 or 2050, I can't remember which day. But she is the one that's pushing that. So I just had to mention these extraordinary Costa Rican women and the contribution that they have made.
I really appreciate that. And again, this has been such a stimulating discussion, and I'm really glad I've gotten to know all of you through this film, through this panel. And I hope that all of you who've watched this interview go out and check out these 3 films, Lifting the Green Screen, Peace in Nature, Peace with Nature in Costa Rica, Sweet Home Monteverde. They are all currently available for sale on our website, peacefilmfest.org. The festival begins September 21st, runs through October 4th. If there's a question you wanted to ask of these filmmakers, we have set up a form on our film pages called Submit a Filmmaker Question. It's a really simple Google form. It has a place for the title of the film, your question, your name, and your email so that we can facilitate that conversation continuing. Please check out all of our programming, and thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who participated in this amazing panel. Your insights were wonderful, and we'll see you all at the festival.